Hello, and welcome to the Truth Within podcast, where we will be sharing precious teachings and divine feminine wisdom that is being remembered for our time. I'm your host, Jo Youle, and each week I'll be in conversation with Dee Delaney, author of the Truth Within trilogy, when we're going to be stripping away all the conditioning and the stories and live in divine communion. We're coming to a place where there is only love. In today's episode, we are going to be inviting you to step away from judgment and put love at the heart of every experience. You can subscribe to our podcast through sacredstoriesmedia.com or search The Truth Within on iTunes. Connect directly with Dee via her website at www.deedelaney.co.uk, and you can also follow me, Jo Youle, on @Reset Rebel Productions on Instagram, or pop onto my website. And that's just if you're interested in creating your own podcasts. I do produce creative audio for brands, businesses, and provide digital content across the board. Now, on to today's wonderful topic, which in the very nature of this podcast is always something quite large. And so, Dee, welcome back to the show.
Hi, Jo.
Such a pleasure, as always, to be back here on this magical platform overlooking the stunning countryside views of mainland Ibiza, right in the middle of the island, surrounded by the wonderful sounds of nature. But today's topic is a bit of a tricky one because we're going to take a look at judgment, especially as strong women. And I think that's definitely something that Dee and I both are. So we're going to have a great chat today. And I'm sure many of you have a very clear sense of right or wrong in life, as we all do. But to live in divine communion, you're kind of saying that maybe we need to let a few of these opinions drop and move more into a space of love. And that's a great concept. But as always, might need a little steer, Dee, if that's something that you feel that you've really done. And obviously moving into the place that you are now from all the things that you've been through that we learn from your books. How do we get there?
Yeah, so reserving judgment and opinions not easy, especially if you're, as I said before, if you're someone like me and you like to give someone a compliment, but compliments are loaded with judgment. That's because we tend to analyse situations through a bipolar lens of good and bad, like and dislike. And when we do this, we are in fact judging life rather than just observing what's there. And there's a subtle but important difference in this. If we observe a situation from a neutral perspective and don't judge it either way, then we avoid potential conflict with ourselves and with others. This is because we never truly know how a person is going to respond to our opinion, because we're not coming from their perspective. And I'll give you a really good example of this. I had a conversation with a friend about their weight. It was a family friend. And I said, "Oh, you look good," which was my opinion of her. And I thought, that's quite a nice thing to say. And, I thought at the time I was giving a genuine compliment. But it was received as judgment, and we ended up having a massive row because my family friend thought I was judging her on her weight, and a blazing row ensued, as only you can when you're with a family member. And we both tried to defend our corner. And what became clear to me was that she'd been struggling with her weight, and her thinness was masking a lot of internal pain. And so by me saying, "Well, you look good," I was in effect validating her pain and her struggle with food, and that was painful for her. And as I said, I use this example of a family member because whenever it comes to learning the lessons we need to learn in life, there's no one more direct or more perfect to show us these lessons than the family, because they're not going to hold back in telling you what you need to learn. So, just be mindful that even when you think you're saying something as a compliment, it's still judgment.
I think that's so true. And I think for women, there's just so much loadedness that goes with these compliments. And, as girls, I don't really know many women on this planet that haven't suffered from some sort of eating issue at some point in life. And that's incredibly sad, like unbelievably sad, that this is a real theme for anyone, really, and particularly in the modern age. I think with the social media thing and the comparing and contrasting, the magazines, all of that rubbish that, we tend to consume as this wonderful plane flies overhead. And I think sometimes, when you tell someone they look amazing, or you give them a compliment, or you even just tell them how gorgeous they are, I think compliments are hard to give, but they're sometimes even harder to receive. And because I know that when my mum, used to sort of comment on my weight and appearance whenever I used to see her, and if she wasn't telling me that I was looking really thin, I'd be getting really upset because I thought I was fat. And you can sometimes never give someone the kind of compliment that they wish to receive, and again, that's just terribly, terribly sad, because really a compliment is just a sign of affection and love and an observation that maybe doesn't have any real loaded meaning behind it. So your family are the kind of people that you probably think do judge you more than any other, and actually they're the ones that love you unconditionally, and that's really a load of old nonsense. That's the conclusion that I've had to come to from all of that weight stuff and women stuff between family members. So I completely understand where you're coming from, and we've all got our own family story, and I think the one that you gave there with your family friend is a really good one, because I think it just shows that we all have a good heart at the end of the day, and we all say things, like I said before, that are coming from a place of love, and consciously or unconsciously, we're never trying to cause offence. So, we can all do our best in these situations, but when we really want to express ourselves towards other people, maybe we're just a little bit unsure of the effect our actual words are going to have, and maybe that's why we're a little bit more cagey with them.
Yeah, I think what we have to do is we have to reprogram our speech, and we have to learn to reframe what we say without using opinion or judgment, and it's not easy sometimes. So we need to stop and think before we speak, that old chestnut, and we need to think about if what we're going to say could potentially cause harm. I think we also need to know our audience. Who are you dealing with? Some people we know well enough, not to say, you just know, don't you? Sometimes just don't go there with that person, because it will cause offence. And I try to ask myself before I say something, is it kind? Is it necessary? And is it absolute truth? And if it is all these things, then go ahead, express yourself. But if not, then sometimes, better just stay silent, say nothing. Because as we've said before, silence has its own power. And when we start to move to a place of conscious conversation, the world around us changes, because we're not throwing out any grenades for others to react to. But like all things in life, it takes some adjusting and practice to learn how to really move to this space of conscious conversation.
Or as my old editor used to say, if in doubt, leave it out, which I loved. It always kind of amused me, that one. And I think, it's very relevant. It's just another way of saying exactly that you need to have a little think about the perception of the things that we say and the things that we are putting out there, because they do have impact. And I think more than ever before, people really do take things quite personally, and a lot of people are suffering from things that maybe we don't actually witness on the face of things, but underneath there's another story going on, and you might never know what that is or how that's going down. But ultimately, your words are a great influence in that person's journey. And thinking before we speak is incredibly important. And I think when someone is deliberately rude or arrogant or aggressive without us provoking the situation, maybe, I don't know, something like road rage, or when people scream and shout at you for no particular reason at all, it does feel fair and measured then, though, to be observing and maybe just not reacting. But it's just difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, I had exactly this situation the other day before I came to Ibiza, and I was in London, and I was driving up behind a guy who'd stopped and was reversing into a space. And I live in India, and in India we sound the horn the whole time. That's how you communicate with the car. So I sounded the horn once as this guy was reversing into the space, just to let him know, look, I'm behind you. And he went absolutely ballistic. He shouted obscenities at me, gave me the finger, you name it. And there was a time when the defiant Dee would have kind of jumped right back and given him as good as he got. And I kind of wanted to inside, and quite frankly, it could have ended up really ugly because he was really, really cross. And he took the sounding of the horn of an absolute, indictment of his character. It was really, really weird. But then I thought, you know what, Dee? He's obviously had a bad day. And I could see this anger streaming from him. So there's absolutely no point in trying to reason with him, because he was so angry that you can't get through. When you observe someone in that state, even if you say the nicest thing, they cannot hear you. He was that mad. So what I did was I said, what's the kindest response to me? What's kind to me? And the kind thing to do for me in that situation was to say nothing, because I wasn't putting myself at risk. And it was that simple. Was it necessary for me to respond? And the answer was no, because as I said, anger normally falls on deaf ears. And if I expressed my concern, he wouldn't have heard it anyway, and it would only be me that would end up becoming more irate. And was it absolute truth? Well, the answer again was no, because actually I was perfectly happy before he came along. I wasn't angry. So I would have been judging him and his anger rather than staying neutral. So considering all of these things, that was happening to the man, he was obviously having a bad day. So the trick was to say nothing. I not let it linger and drive off and let it pass. And it's not always easy, and sometimes we can stew on these things, and I kind of stewed for 5 minutes. I would be lying if I said I didn't just let it pass on the moment, but that's kind of the right thing to do in that situation, is think about yourself rather than the other. Take responsibility for you and your actions. Don't worry about him. There's nothing you can do about him.
I think you did absolutely the right thing there. And, I don't want to be the kind of creator of some sort of moral panic by disseminating these kinds of words on a podcast like this. But I feel like, from living in London all those years, those kind of road rage incidents, and having worked at so many news desks in London and receiving those emails from Scotland Yard about people getting into those flying tempers for the most pathetically stupid, silly, crazy, minuscule reasons. All sorts of things can happen if you do react in those kinds of situations. You never know what was going on in that guy's world. And I think you did the right thing, because, you definitely were being kind to you. And I think anything could have happened. And I always used to say to my mum, when people would get irate on the tube, say nothing. Absolutely do not interact, because, I don't know, you just get all sorts of nasty responses in this day and age, and it's terrifying. And I think, that is exactly when we do have to sort of button our lip, as my dad would say, and not react, which is sometimes so challenging, not to see red and let the red mist rise up all the way up to our crown chakra and have a mini explosion, which is always tempting because we do like to indulge those emotions. And I think suppressing anger, as we've talked about on this podcast before, is not good. It can manifest in dis-ease by numbing down those feelings and emotions is terrible. But equally, indulging them in situations like that is not the way forward. So I think, yeah, you just got to tune into that inner voice in those moments that's saying, don't say it, and really, yeah, listen, because I think, when you say it anyway, you are going to regret it, and that feeling is probably even worse. And it's, walking away from that situation with that extreme sense of disappointment, not in the other person, but in ourselves, then we're just going to end up feeling terrible for the rest of the day if we're fully intact, because, as I said, London can be treacherous. So what's the trick to minimising these manic moments then?
I think it comes down back to this sense that there is no right and wrong. There is no right and wrong. So defending your right or your wrong is a pointless exercise, isn't it? It just doesn't get you anywhere. And I know, because I used to be like a dog with a bone, and I always had to have the last word. And I would always know that I was pushing it. And I am with my family members, I'm a bit like that. And all this does that, it roots me in more and more judgment and more conflict. So most of the time when you meet somebody and you're not agreeing, the best thing to do is to show your strength through silence. I'm laughing at that because it's the best thing to do, but it's not what we always do. There's something intense about silence, isn't there? There's something magical that cuts through all the things that are unsaid. So I'm trying to button it, as your father says, and I'm trying not to have the last word, to walk away. And when you speak from the heart and silence, when you fill your own space with silence, no one else can command it, only you.
That's so true. So true. And I think exactly what you say about the silence being the most powerful thing. I mean, we did a whole podcast episode on silence and the power of it. It's huge. And I think when you don't give that person the power of a reply, what they're then forced to do is, in that big space and gap that you've just created, question their very action and how it's affected you. Because if you don't give them and don't warrant them with a response, then they are going to start wondering what your reply is to that. And that's so much more powerful, to actually put them on the spot and into a position where they're questioning themselves and their reaction. And I often feel like that was with text messages. You sent something in a moment of anger and you don't get a reply from the other person. You're sitting there hanging in the balance going, Christ, why did I say that? And the fact that they're not replying just makes you feel so bad that it's actually a brilliant way to deal with it. I think silence is the best thing. I've got a lot of friends that are sort of in the martial arts world. And again, the best way to deal, I think, with very, very volatile situations is to take that moral ground of not getting involved and using words rather than actions to provide peace. And I think being around high vibrational people in general, you just don't need to say anything to make your presence known sometimes. I think, as you've said, actions speak louder than words, but sometimes nothing is needed. And I think you talk about this a lot in your third book, The Truth Within the Heart of Love, where you describe being at the Dalai Lama's teachings in the Himalayas. And always wanted to go up to Dharamsala and meet him. So I'm, what a dreamy situation that must have been. And I feel that this story personifies what you're trying to say, so that you can share a little bit more of that maybe with our listeners as well.
Yeah, so the last 2 years I've spent the summer before coming to Ibiza in the Himalayas, and the Dalai Lama offers teachings for the monks and the Tibetan people, and also tourists can go. And I've wanted to meet the Dalai Lama since I was a little girl, and since I fell in love with the Tibetan story. And he's like my hero. And so, but there are thousands of people at these teachings, and you can't get close to him. You see him up in a screen. But I was desperate to get a hug or get some attention from him. So at the tea break, towards the end of the teachings, I could see the security team roping off an area. And I thought, oh my God, he's going to walk past here to his residence. So this is my chance. So I bolted like an absolute crazy woman in the middle of the teachings with all these beautiful monks sitting serenely listening to His Holiness. There's me running to get pole position at the side of the rope for when His Holiness walked down. And as he's walking through the crowd with his entourage, and all the beautiful Tibetan people are kind of bowing their heads in reverence to the Dalai Lama, I'm literally jumping up and down like a crazy woman, saying, look, I'm over here. And everyone's looking at me going, oh, she has no respect. And in that moment, I turned into a little child because I wanted to have my hug. But I didn't. The point of this story is I didn't need him to come even close, because you can feel his presence. You can feel his compassionate, loving heart all over the place. And as he walked past, he's probably about 20 meters away. I could feel him. He didn't need to say anything. And as he was getting closer, my heart chakra started to open. And I started to cry, because I could just feel this love oozing out of me. And it was this pure, unconditional love that was coming from him. And that's the power. That's the power of silence and the power of love. Being in the presence of him. There's no place for ego. There's only place for this beautiful divine love.
How beautiful. I think, I can just imagine you sprinting to the front. I think I've done that at quite a lot of rock gigs, actually, when I was a music journalist. And, Bon Jovi, back in the day, came on stage in his little leather pants. And there was me, literally stepping over hot coals to get to the front and being very ungraceful in terms of barging past people. And I've done that a few times, actually. I'm not that proud to admit it, but I just did. And I think also, I don't know, I did go and see. The other thing that came to mind was when I went to one of those ashrams to visit Amma, the hugging guru. And the same sort of thing. It was a ridiculously long queue. And I queued for hours and hours and hours just to get this famous hug. And I just think just being there in that atmosphere was just enough. The hug was really inconsequential. It was just the cherry on top of a cake that didn't necessarily need an icing. It was a moment in time. And it was actually almost disappointing in the end to actually receive that physical touch, because I think just witnessing what she was giving to the people around her and their response to her very being was, it was quite life-changing in lots of weird ways that I didn't believe could be possible, because I was quite cynical. I only really went with some friends because they were going. I wasn't one of her biggest fans, but it was quite interesting to see the transformation of the people that she was touching and, really giving some beautiful learnings and precious teachings, a little bit like we are on this podcast with you, Dee. So I think that whole story personifies the power of love. Nothing needs to be said or done. So I think that's a really nice thing to observe. And I think true, authentic love is just so genuine that it can be felt from miles around you sometimes. And on that note, is there maybe one final message that you want to leave our listeners with today?
Yeah, please know that there is no right or wrong. Love is the essence in every song.
Thank you to our wonderful listeners for tuning in today. And you can find the Truth Within podcast at sacredstoriesmedia.com on iTunes or from your favourite podcast provider. And you can also connect with Dee on her social media pages. On Instagram, or Facebook at Dee Delaney01 and find out about her books on her website www.deedelaney.co.uk, or you can connect with me, Jo Youle, via my podcast services and creative audio at resetrebelproductions.com. Big love. Until the next time.